Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this conference and thank you for being here. We were thinking that we were happy because we almost have a full house. It's always nice to have people coming to listen to you. Today we're going to be talking about a fascinating topic, according to me, namely identity. And the question is, why is identity still a priority for 2025? I have Benoît Fuzeau next to me, who is going to introduce himself and his activity as well. Hello everyone, thank you for being here. As Matthieu has said, I'm impressed to see how many people are in the room, especially for a topic such as identity. So clearly we made the right choice to ask this question. Why is it still a current and relevant topic in 2025? My name is Benoît Fuzeau. I have different hats. First, I work at Banque Populaire. I'm the head of an organization called CLUSIF. It is a public interest, common interest organization. Sorry, I tend to lose my voice. Since this November 2024, it's a professional organization that brings together different players, that brings solutions in security, but also users. Today we have 550 members, which are for 1,300 participants, 200 meetings a year. We've addressed 24 deliverables last year, so feel free to join us. But I think we'll have time to talk about it later on. Well, thank you, Benoît. Matthieu Trivier, I'm in charge of pre-sale practice for Semperis, a publisher. For those of you who don't know Semperis, we are solution and software publisher on resilience and identity. We offer solutions from the first blocks to do about identity and audit, all the way to active protection of Active Directory and Microsoft Identity. But we also have a major strength, which is that we're able to rebuild a compromised environment in record time. But we're going to try and avoid promoting too much up, and so let's move to the next session. And before we start talking about identity, let's define identity. When we talk about identity, usually we talk about identity as per Microsoft. We talk about a technology that's been created 60 years ago. It's one of the oldest technologies that is still being used in almost 90% of companies. So if we look at in the rearview mirror, 1989, Microsoft offered Active Directory in Windows Preview, and it was adopted by companies of all sizes. Beyond that, you had Active Directory, different pillars. You had identification, authentication, and privilege management. And it worked quite well, and it was implemented in many companies. And we didn't really worry about it because it was delivering the outcomes that the technology was designed for. Then in 2013, we have INCYBER. We're really lucky because it's a pillar for cybersecurity in France. And they started to have the first works around the graph and therefore lateralization of an attacker in an environment that has an Active Directory. So that was 2013. We weren't talking about ransomware then. We weren't talking about identity compromission or identity security then. Then 2014, ANSSI released the first recommendation guidelines to secure Active Directory. So we started to see the premises of Active Directory identity protection. That was 10 years ago. Unfortunately, at the time, it wasn't something that gained a lot of momentum. And we found ourselves with companies that were looking at it from afar, but that weren't really applying and the ANSSI recommendations. Then in 2017, there was a major event, or two, WannaCry and Pitcha, first ransomwares that started to use identity to compromise and spread into environments. And that was a major realization for companies. They understood that they needed to secure their identity. And that was, again, the genesis. Then let's continue, 2018, still in France, Benjamin Delpy and Vincent Letou offered an attack tool, Mimikatz. They started abusing Active Directory identity tool to do privilege escalate. This is a tool that's used by all pen testers, and in the real life scenarios, it's still very much used, even though we're 6 years after the first presentation of Mimikatz. And in 2020, we had the COVID crisis that forced people working from home. And we realized that the walls of a company that were protecting the information systems weren't really protecting them anymore, because the only block that you could find in your own computer and at home or with a VPN was your identity. So we started focusing on identity again in order to try and make sure that by using a secured identity, you could secure the identity of the information system as a whole. So all these different steps that we've seen in research work, but also in attack work, as well as in the context that we've seen in the past few years, has led to the following question: how to secure identities. And in parallel, we've started to see the first works and the first companies that have started securing that. And we've reached a first level of maturity for that. And that's part of the first theme that we're going to talk about today. I'm turning to you, Benoît, with the experience that you have with a lot of chief data officers and chief information officers. How can companies become more mature when it comes to securing identities, and what could they do? Well, there's a lot of work to do still. And that's why I wanted to really partake in this roundtable, because there are a lot of confusion. So let's do a poll, actually. Because if I talk about identity, and account management, I'm not sure you really know what I'm talking about. And when we talk about identity and that you investigate, you realize that you don't really explain the vocab enough. That's one of the messages we wanted you to convey. What is an account? What is an identity? Habilitation, authentication. These are words that we use on daily, but we don't always have the same definition for them. And just that makes it easy to implement a project or leads to a disaster. And whenever you have a product-related identity, you need to organize. This is something that is crucial. A few years ago, I launched a project on identity. And unfortunately, it didn't go all the way because I'd forgotten something which is called process. And when you don't onboard the business, the HR functions in this, which has nothing technological, and usually you only take the technological side of things into account, and that's a failure. And the failure that I had was because I hadn't onboarded HR people. And they almost opposed it because they said to me, well, this is going to generate too much work for me. But the end goal was really to make them save time. But because we didn't anticipate enough, it failed. And that is why today, everything related to habilitation, identity, if you start with this, what I would suggest is that you start by recertification, because this is not going to change your process or your governance. And that is something that people should hear and should understand as well. And when we started looking at the different solutions, including the solution Casden and the Semperis solution, that's interested me was how fast we could retrieve our Active Directory. And we could do a poll, again, on a show of hand. How many people in the room have a Active Directory restoration plan? Okay. That's better than what we usually have, but it's still not great. And yet, you can see that the different attacks that we have, that we see, they're all after your identity. And unlike what we could hear, and what I want you to understand is that the first vehicle for attack is not a file, it's not a folder, it's identity. That's changing, and this is something that you have to bear in mind. Phishing is one way of being able to use and retrieve identities, but it's not the number one attack vehicle. We're seeing this more and more. Identity theft is what allows attackers and then do a golden kick it. So get your Active Directory and block your whole company. Thank you, Benoît. From a publisher standpoint, I'm lucky because I'm probably the oldest resource of Semperis in Europe. I joined them in 2020, so over 4 years ago. And I've been on a crusade to secure identity for companies. Just let me give you one figure, and I'm not here to promote it, but we're publishing an audit tool for identity environment, so Entra ID and Active Directory. It was launched in March 2021. Between March 2021 and this slide is actually quite wrong now, because we've seen over 40,000 downloads of this tool. It's a free tool that anyone can download. You can clearly see that in less than 4 years, there have been over 10,000 downloads. And what has impressed me is the fact that companies started to understand that this was a priority. For a long time, it was a thing. Yeah, we needed identity, but securing this identity was last on the list of priorities. Once you endpoint, the network were secured, identity came last. But we're seeing a paradigm shift. And we're seeing that people are realizing that identity should be secured first, and that's actually more important than securing the endpoint. We have a certain number of technologies and solutions that were offered around identity, IAM, IGA, PAM, Bastion, you name it. But I think these are solutions that you've heard about and that you've been hearing about. But this is very 2020. And now we have a few emerging technologies out there that are impacting identity security. And before I ask a question, I'd like to introduce ITDR. What is ITDR? Identity Threat Detection. It was defined at the end of 2021 by Gartner. It's quite recent. Identity Threat Detection and Response. It was the extension, so we've had NDR, XDR, and now we have a specific category which showcases how important this topic is to first do the detection of identity abuse, but also a response capacity. And this is something that is really highly innovative. Up until now, we were only detecting what was happening in an identity referential, and we were hoping to get a SOC that would be able to respond in case of an incident. But now we're seeing that the attacks have gone from a few days to be able to go from initial compromission of a workstation to domination of an environment to a few hours, if not minutes. We've had scenarios where we do incident response, where we see environments that have been compromised, and between the moment the endpoint is compromised and there's full dominance of the environment, it takes less than 25 minutes. Hence the importance of preparing on the securing of your environment and your response to a potential event. Do you have any other emerging technologies in mind that would be interesting to present? I don't think it's important to talk about technology, but rather I'd like to talk about process. The technology is one thing, but you need to understand the needs. We talk about MFA, we talk about strengthening identity, and I think that it's first and foremost about processes. And I'd like again to do a quick poll on a show of hand. How many people in the room know how many and manage the number of accounts you have in your Active Directory? Do you know exactly the number of accounts you have in your Active Directory? One person. I'll raise my hand because I know exactly how many accounts I have. But when you go back on Monday or on Wednesday from this conference, look at the number of accounts you have and the number of tests that you have. Look at the number of generic accounts you have in your Active Directory. And I think that clearly there's a major risk when it comes to that. So it's not only about the process. We see that identity is at the height of it. And we've heard about the zero trust mode. And one of the pillars of zero trust is identity. So you check the person's identity to access different resources through a device, a computer. And I like to talk about process, and I like to really mention this because we tend to talk about technologies, and you see here in the trade show there are so many exhibitors, hundreds of them. And I feel like we tend to forget about the basics. And when I see that there's only one person in the room who knows exactly how many accounts are in their Active Directory and number of people who log in, I think that this is an issue and that we already have questions to ask ourselves about this. Let's talk about something else. I know exactly the categories of accounts that you can have. User account, admin account, because that's also something else. Look at the number of admin or host accounts you have in your Active Directory. Matthieu the tools that you talked about also give you that kind of information. The number of people who have too many rights on different resources. And when we talk about process, because the people who are leaving is one thing, and you can add different processes, but people who are changing position, look at the process. When I see access rights, in my company, I mean, the number of people who have changed position, who have kept their rights and their access is problematic. Look at whether you have a mobility, entry, and exit process, especially with all the SaaS solutions that we now have. When you log into a SaaS solution and you don't have a DSO, do you decommission the person, the account? That's basic, but you should do it. And even in 2025, we're still seeing this. And we're seeing this across all different companies and organizations. So this is already a question that we should ask ourselves. But bouncing back off what you've just said, one of the elements that we need to talk about that is probably going to keep us busy in the coming years is non-human accounts. So generic accounts. You've mentioned them, but there are things that were created in an empiric way based on the needs that we had in information system integration, and we've done it in an empirical way. And managing these non-human accounts is a real challenge, and I think that in the coming years we're going to focus on this, because these are accounts that also create a risk, and the higher risk actually, higher than human accounts. Going back to these accounts, do you all have Copilot? Well, you know the AI robots that you have that summarize different things. That's great. These new accounts are legitimate. Do they have the right access, the right rights? Do they have access to different resources? This is a question that we should ask ourselves as well. And again, this is nothing about the technology. It's nothing smart. But this is a question that we should ask ourselves. Now, the third theme for today, which we're going to change vocab. We've been talking about identity security, and we've been talking a lot about resilience as well. Identity resilience, and between security and resilience there is a difference, and there's something missing. There's a missing link here. Let me give you the ADSI facts and figures. So 2023, there were 30 CH out of 2,000 that were hospitals that were victims of ransomware. It took 2 weeks for the DAX hospital to recover from a ransomware attack. And since 2023, the CARE program emerged that's going to focus on health. And one of the biggest pillars of the health program is the modernization of the information system, including Active Directories. So here's a quick question for you. Yesterday, we were talking about security. And in the future, we'll be talking about resilience. What is the missing link between security and resilience?
Vous avez 2 heures.
You have 30 seconds. No. The answer is anticipation. Anticipation. We were talking about security. Up until now, we were talking about trying to do our best. But now we're trying to anticipate. We need to be able to anticipate the worst case scenario. And this part, and you were talking about the capacity to recover from a compromised system. And we realized that the worst case scenario doesn't happen to other people. It happens to anyone and everyone. Let me give you a few figures. To be able to recover and to rebuild a minimal IT infrastructure, this is a ransomware report that was published by Semperis last year. 6% of the people that were interviewed tell us that they couldn't do it between a few hours and it takes a few days to recover, and that generates losses of hundreds of thousands of euros, and the brand image as well can suffer from it, and this is critical to take into account. And if you look at the bottom here, you see that France is slightly lucky. 36% of the respondents said that they have a specific plan for their Active Directory. But you also need to understand that most companies integrate identity as a software brick. But if you have this worst case scenario in your company, and I don't wish it to anyone, the first thing you need to do to have your information system up and running again is your identity, because your business applications, you need that for sharing folders, printer, workstations. All of this is going to require identity. So the number one thing you need to do is to rebuild your identity system. And if you haven't done it, there's not much else you can do. I'd like to add one thing to that. What Matthieu's saying is really interesting, because earlier there were people who've raised their hand on whether they had a plan or not, but who has ever recreated an infrastructure from scratch after an attack? Well done. How did you rebuild it? And how often? Twice a year? Every 10 years? Before I give you the floor, we have a certain number of clients that we work with who've done it once. And we believe that, it's over and done. We believe that once a year, at least, is the minimum. We ask our clients to do a restoration test at least once per quarter, because your identity environment is living, and what you're doing at a given time might not be true anymore in 2 weeks' time. Because you have new apps, new elements that you've plugged in. And also take a look at Microsoft's process to rebuild an AD. Feel free to take a look at it. I mean, it's really interesting. 28 steps, 96 pages. Don't try and print it when you don't have a printer that works. And Matthieu is forgetting something. AD is often related to your safeguard system. Because once they have your identity, they're going to blackmail you for a ransom. And once they have your backups and your recorded files, then it's jackpot for them. Before we move to the next question, I think what's important for you to understand, and the message we wanted to come across, is risk management. You need to practice. You need to practice. You need to train. The argument that I like to give is that you all have in your organization exercises, drills on fires. This is compulsory, mandatory for all companies that are different sizes. What about the cyber risk? Because it comes second or third in terms of risks. But here we don't have any obligation on crisis management. And yet all the stats are showing it. A company that is practiced, that is trained for crisis management, takes 2 times less to recover than another company. So feel free to already include also the rebuilding of your Active Directory or your identity referential, because this is one of the first building blocks you'll have to rebuild. Bouncing back off what you said, when we're talking about preparedness, you need to have a drill, but you need to be also to give evidence. And when we're talking about evidence, we're talking about regulation as well. The 2 main issues that came out, the DORA since entry into force since January, and these 2 also that's coming up, where the Senate that's voted for it in March. It should be for this year, absolutely, for sure. Mid-June, probably, it's going to be submitted to the National Assembly, and we believe that in September the decrees will be ready. We should have been starting to get ready for the past 3 years for these regulations. And the message I want you to hear is that these regulations are actually opportunities for us. We can't have this dual speech and say, well, there are threats, a lot of threats, and at the same time, well, the regulation is really constraining. We need to take control of the situation. The regulation is giving us a roadmap to move forward. But you also need to understand that the regulatory bodies, and I think that INCYBER was really clear on that, we need some time to adapt. And I think that they've been really clear on that. And we need, however, to support SMEs and the different suppliers that are working in our ecosystem.
Et ces législations, il y a quelque chose.
And in this legislation, there are two things that you need to have in mind, according to me. It's the risk management, preparedness. We talk about resilience. Matthieu was talking about 30 hospitals that were attacked out of 1,000, but they're all separate at different times. But what happens if there are 100 hospitals that are attacked at the same time? Can you imagine the disaster? And the regulations really wanted to protect us and them from that, and that's the mindset. You shouldn't be opposed to it and see, well, that's a regulation, it's going to be complex, there are going to be constraints. Yes, it is going to be complex, but we'll make do with it.
Et innovation.
Regulation and the first example, the bomb, I mean, regulation, I mean, it's important, and yet there are lots of things which are done as far as the innovation is concerned, and regulation and innovation are not contradictory. Aviation, I mean, certifications and so on, I mean, we're doing okay, and yet in this particular business, there's a lot for innovation. And the third domain is electricity, lots of regulation, certifications, and yet we've got lots of innovation. So we're going to have to do the same in the digital world. It's going to be complex, but we'll all get together and do it, and we'll manage. And it's the benefit of forums such as this one, actually. Just to add on, I mean, the regulation due out or out now, I mean, the word resilience is a word which is found everywhere in those regulations. I mean, it's not just only linked to identity in a catastrophe scenario. The first brick is the identity, so we're going to have a focus, and it's written in the text of law. Identity will be focused heavily, and we're going to have to evidence that. I mean, we told you to test every quarter or every year, but you're going to have to evidence the fact that you're testing. So the companies will be forced to deal with this type of situation. Regularly I hear, well, I mean, that doesn't impact me, NIS2. I would like to go against that, because we're all customers and suppliers of somebody. So we're impacted. We have to be involved, and it's important for us all to be part of this approach to increase our level of security. When I see applications without any certificate being published, I mean, when there's no strong authentication on applications using personal data, I mean, this is a big question for me, and it goes on and on and on. So collectively, we all have to fight for that, convey messages, make it common knowledge, so that company managers are fully aware of the risk that they take on that. As a conclusion, before we go to the question and answer time, when we prepared this conference with Benoît, I mean, we wondered why it was still a topic. I mean, there are lots of things put in place, technologies, regulations, but the point that we agreed on is to say, well, identity is today one of the last cornerstone of IT, with a human being behind that. I mean, we talked about identity. Identity is linked to a human being, so that focus is on the need to focus on the human with a capital H, rather than the hardware. So we're going to have to increase the awareness of people, not just in the company, also the public at large, to make them aware of how they secure their own identity. It's a topic which is going to be on top of the list for years and years. We could probably talk about it next year and the year after, offering new solutions maybe on this particular topic. That was important to state that the human being is at the core of our systems. Everywhere we hear about AI, but I talk about HI, human intelligence. Thank you for your presence all. If you have any questions. Spontaneous question. Stéphane from the Group Serrier. I think that you've given us a big overview and the responsibility we have of the AD, and we're responsible for it, but we've got assets in other organizations managed by Active Directories too. In what you see, I mean, maybe in the bank domain, is there a kind of a community? The Active Directory is a public book and we can access that, so we can copy it. Do you have those movements with the multi-tenant teams, etc.? We've got shared assets, but I've got my asset, which is not under my own authority. Are you starting to see things happening? I'll give you my editor's answer. Thinking technically, most of the identity referential we're going to find stem from Active Directory. If we talk about Okta, that's synchronization. So the Active Directory remains the reference documents, which is going to be poured into other documents and on which we're going to plug applications. The message we're carrying is by safeguarding the core, de facto, we're going to secure the other elements, even if they're not under your own responsibility. You've got a reliable, trusted flow of information. We've got other technologies. There's identity in EWS, but some editors do it. We've decided to focus on the static resource. It's an expertise which is getting forgotten about. The administrator of AD is closer to retirement age, so we're going to focus on these sources. Tomorrow, you're not the only one to have this type of issue. There are things that we want to integrate, but adding more complexity, therefore other types of experts. We're thinking about it, but I mean, it's still from a distance so far. What we can see, Stéphane, about these topics, there are two major categories. There is the identity with our customers and then with our partners. We're talking about federation, we're talking about all these things, yes, but I'm not sure we have found a solution yet. Lots of questions still. So the regulations Duat will put the church in the middle of the village and stating what the role of each partners and others are like. I work in the banking environment, so we have to monitor our suppliers, and that's going to lead then to a selection. So I think that we're going to lose the smaller players, and we're going to have to find some different mechanisms about that. I think it's early days. We're still asking ourselves lots of questions on that. The difficult subject, and I think that Matthieu, with the different technologies that we have, that we can find on the ground floor, might bring you some answers, but that's got to be thought about and monitored and managed.
Il n'y a pas de mauvaise question. Hein.
Bonjour.
Jean-François Mény, Crédit Agricole, around the Active Directory. We are talking about evolution of identity with some of our suppliers, Microsoft leaving out solutions such as MIM, projecting us into the cloud. I mean, what is your point of view on this, and how we're going to take the bend? I mean, with that, us, the European banking systems, not using this kind of solution. I'm not going to be able to provide you a clear answer, unfortunately. Again, The professional associations, I mean, Stefan and I are members of that, and I invite you to come and help us think about that. I mean, come and join us, thinking together also with institutions such as the ANSI. I mean, the geopolitical environment is complicated now, so all these topics are brought up again. I think that is going to really give us a wake-up call, actually. You were talking about Microsoft. I mean, we might find alternatives. Some people have tried to create other clusters or other alliations. ID Connect, for instance, which is developing. Other structures are putting things in place. Let's try and find common things so as not to be totally tied with extraterritorial solutions. Because there's one thing that we've got to point out is the relying on the digital element. I mean, we've got to be really careful as to what we use and what we need to use. The Microsoft position and the Active Directory, they paused on it for a while because of the emergence of the cloud. But I mean, Windows Server 2025 reintroduces the first changes after 10 years in the Active Directory. So Microsoft, as an editor, didn't kill technology. They encouraged their client to use the cloud. We know why now. But the technology will remain for 10 years minimum. And there's something that surprised me, shocked me in 2024. We've seen a certain number of steps backwards because the cloud provided a solution, a generic solution, but for specific needs. We have some prospects who decided to go backwards to find better suited solutions and more better adjusted to their business.